Hello, my friends. Someone contacted me to tell me you have an extraordinary freedom of speech in England. The proof is that the jihadists, the terrorists from London, appeared on television. Some of them were on Channel 4 television. And then everyone saw it. They prayed in front of the camera in a park in London. They prostrated themselves before a flag, one of the countless flags used by the caliphate, the black flag with white writing. And then they introduced themselves as nothing other than future terrorists. What happened is that nobody touched them. The person who wrote to me was surprised, perhaps even shocked by the level of freedom of expression we have in England. Actually, that's not true at all. The only ones who have a license to incite killings, call for hatred and all that are those people, the Muslim extremists, not the others. That is to say, just since the attacks, they've had to arrest at least 25 people. For Islamophobia, for example, there's a guy, let me give you an example. There's a guy in England, actually two guys, they burned the Quran and posted the video on YouTube. I mean, in a state like this, in a secular state, it wouldn't be any different than if they had burned a book by Zola. On the other hand, it went extremely badly and they're under arrest. You see what I mean? Whereas at the same time, a jihadist who goes on television presenting himself as a jihadist, planning to commit an attack, atrocities, to kill people, nobody touches him. By the way, the guy who burned the Quran shows us a little bit that there are some Muslims who are a bit offended by the fact that he burned the Quran. And once again, sorry to come back to my favorite topic, because unfortunately it's the obsession of a lot of people. The guy who has, for example, that Algerian who attacked police with pliers or maybe a screwdriver, Monsignor, I can't remember exactly. He used a tool to attack cops on the forecourt of Notre Dame Church. He was someone who was obsessed with the caliphate. That's someone. They found a video of allegiance to Islamic State of Iraq and Syria at his place, just to tell you. So, a guy here in England burns the Quran, Muslims feel offended. Okay, that's nice. I can't explain something now. It's that when I was little, I was told that our Lord, superior to God, guaranteed us to go to paradise. The Caliph, the third Caliph, Uthman ibn Affan, this Caliph, he burned Qurans. And which Quran here? Look. The guy who was arrested in England, he didn't burn the Quran, he burned a copy of the Quran. That means that in terms of material damage, what he did is replaceable. He visited a bookstore, bought a Quran for millions of copies and burned it. All right, now if we take our dear Caliph, he took Qurans written under the Prophet of the Muslims' dictation. That means the original Qurans written on animal skins, absolutely irreplaceable Qurans. And he piled them up and set them on fire. May God bless him. That's what actually happened. If you want the story about burning the Quran, I'll share it because it's part of a child's radicalization process. We'll do two things. First, teach you the Quran is what matters. The most sacred thing that Muslims have, it's the word of God. So, we're going to get that into your head, assuming you accept it. Assuming for the sake of the video, you accept it. There you go. You've accepted it. Okay? Next step. We're going to take a caliph and we're going to stage him burning. This thing that is the most sacred in your mental universe. You have to say what? You have to think it's a good thing, okay? You have to think the caliph is doing a good thing. It's a way, if you will, to break down all your critical thinking. It's a way to show you that everything the Arab man in power does, well, it's kind of like, there's another thing too. I don't know if they did that to you as a child. They did it to me too, but well, it didn't work. They take Caliph Omar and then they tell you that he had the heart. So much. He had such a good heart that when he remembered he had buried his daughter alive, he would cry about it. You see, what I mean is it's a violation of your humanity. And actually, that's how it happens. In Muslim society, it means we have a system of Islamic radicalization which ultimately aims to create soldiers for the Caliph. And then it starts very small. It's like that Algerian who attacked police officers on the square in front of Notre Dame. There are people who know him. I've seen posts from people who know him, testimonies. They were shocked, yes, but they were shocked. They said, in the press it was written, I didn't print it, but that's what the press says, sudden radicalization. But it's not sudden at all. It's not sudden. It's just that the guy, isn't it? The guy. He was 80% at the time when he seemed normal, at the time when people talked about him. He seemed fine, he seemed nice. At that time, he had 80% of what it takes to become a terrorist, that's all. After quickly being radicalized, he only needed the final 20%. He had to come across people who understood the psychological triggers that had been put into this guy's head, even by his mother since his childhood. And then, that's it, he was ready, he was all set, all ripe. So if you tell his mother, she'll say, but that's not possible because you're making this up. It's not true. I didn't do that. Yes, you didn't do that. It's true. You didn't do it like that. But actually, without realizing it, you put things in his head. That means radicalization. The program for making a terrorist isn't a single unified program. It's a program that was put together as needed for the cause. The area was split into sections, with each person assigned one. A section was given to the elementary school, a section to the secondary school, a section to the father, another to the mother, and so on, another to the mosque, and so on, and so on, and so on. And that creates a dissolution of responsibilities where no one, honestly, deep down inside, feels like they're preparing a future terrorist. Yes, but when you look at the pattern, each person is adding something, giving him a little piece of bread, until the moment he comes across the real ones who will find the guy ripe, ready to be picked like a fruit. So, as I was saying, to get back to our story, for me, it's a little bit, I'm telling it to you today, I'm telling it to you a bit in the African way. You know, African stories are always like that. It begins with one story, then moves to the next, and so on. But then we start going back through the story like Russian nesting dolls, even though Russian nesting dolls aren't African at all. So what's happening? Is it that freedom of expression has shocked people? This person who wrote to me, she asked me why they have the right to have a Russian doll. Let me explain. I'm opening the car because it's very hot inside. Let me tell you something. Sometimes you have to stop over. Sometimes you have to rewind the movie. Sometimes you have to rewind the movie to understand something. Sometimes if you take it from the beginning, it's less obvious. The first thing I want to tell you is that we live in a world that is extremely logical. Things are what they seem to be. I advise you not to go towards conspiracy theories. There is no conspiracy. Things are what they seem to be. That's the first point. Second, play the film backward and you'll quickly understand. Watch it repeatedly. Everybody knows it. Sided with the terrorists even very recently when ALAP was released. Terrorist troops who are doing a good job. According to the words of a minister of the French Republic, the French press has literally, I feel like being vulgar, literally losing my mind. Today, the people of Alep are getting back to their lives. Little girls are going to school, some women are veiled, others are not. Christians gather in churches. I saw images of them holding mass in a church that had collapsed into ruins. They still have the chance today. France has wept all this. That France has, like hipsters, like leftists, has wept. They turned off the Eiffel Tower. To tell you, that day when ALAP was freed from the terrorists, so the terrorists are supported by the admission of all Western states. The terrorists received money, received weapons and all that. Alright, now I'm going to rewind the film to show you something. Let's rewind the film. The terrorist in Syria is killing people with Western support. If we go back to the beginning of his radicalization journey and we get to the extremist mosque, what is it? The role of the extremist mosque, it's to mentally prepare the terrorist who will go to Syria, who will be supported by the empire. Okay, so if the empire supports the terrorists and arms the terrorists, funds the terrorists, He's not crazy enough to go attack the terrorist factories. That's why the extremist mosques here are out in the open. Because they serve a purpose. They're part of a production chain. They're part of a chain that produces jihadists. And that will send him all the way to those places. It could be in Syria. It could be in the Philippines. It could be anywhere there's a defiant regime. They will project the production, the sewage from those mosques. They will project it onto those countries. So that's why they don't close them. That's why they're very far from closing those mosques. I listened to an interview with the minister, two ministers, one from the Emirates and another from Saudi Arabia. I think they were ministers of foreign affairs. I shared the video on Aldo News. In fact, first of all, these ministers are concerned about two things. They are concerned about the rise of Islamic extremism in Europe. That means the guy is saying one day we'll see from the West the arrival of monsters or absolutely radicalized Islamists in industrial quantities. They are worried about Islam. You see, the Saudis worried about what's happening in the West. He also said something else. He said that Saudi Arabia had asked the Westerners, France for example. In fact, France had initially accused Saudi Arabia of funding extremism or financing radicalization on its soil. So Saudi Arabia said, show us any mosque that you think we are funding and over which you think we have authority. And that is preparing radicals, that is making extremist statements, and we will shut it down within 24 hours. The thing is, when the French came back with the numbers, it turns out that only 1% of the mosques in France are funded. Well, 1% of the funding comes from Saudi Arabia. He said that the majority comes from Turkey and from the Maghreb. That's the first point he mentioned. Second point, he told them, these extremists who are not your citizens, expel them. And those who are your citizens, you block them, you prevent them from acting. What did they answer him? They answered him, yes, but we have freedom of expression and all that. What did he answer? He answered, stop complaining. So what's happening today, just to tell you, in terms of freedom of expression, sometimes I listen on the internet. I listen to Saudi, Lebanese, Egyptian channels. Debates about Islam, about terrorism, about fundamentalism, about radicalization. Sometimes speakers from Saudi Arabia or other Muslim countries participate with their names and photos. I can tell you that there is more freedom of expression, there is more freedom to criticize, there is more intellectual freedom. Or in Saudi Arabia, in Lebanon, in Egypt, than in France, for example, or in the United Kingdom. That's the problem we're facing. Over there, they're not. Daesh isn't connected to Islam. They're not at that level. Today in the West, people still deny all of this. That's it. Anyway, I also received questions about why Qatar was ostracized. Well, I don't know. It's very complicated what's happening between the Arab countries. I also regret the violence of their reaction because they're expelling Qataris from other countries. And all by force. Even people who had been working and living there for years. That's a bit of the problem with Arab countries. You can't trust them. When countries have even minor diplomatic issues, they punish ordinary people. In any case, Qatar, I think it was a gift for Trump. Trump arrived in Saudi Arabia. He signed deals. A lot of money was exchanged. I think what we saw, what was announced, is just the tip of the iceberg. A lot of money was exchanged. I think Trump sold $350 billion worth of defense contracts, a historic deal, to Saudi Arabia. You should know that he gave them a discount. For example, consider the defense of a Western country like France or Germany. We're talking about $50 billion annually, totaling $500 billion over 10 years. Saudi Arabia, which is a country that has many more threats, many more borders, many more tensions and risks than a country like Germany or France. They got $35 billion a year for their defense, which is still a very good price. It's a reasonable price for the contract size and may surprise those unfamiliar with defense contract figures. Anyway, I think he asked for a gesture, he asked for something, he made an effort himself on the price. Anyway, he needed money quickly because he has things to finance in his country. He's caught in a bind in Washington, so he needs to prove himself. So he sold 10 years of defense to Saudi Arabia at a very good price. When you look at it from their side, they got a friendly price. I think in exchange, he asked them to make a gesture, something about terrorism, something on a diplomatic level. Why did they choose Qatar? Qatar hosts a lot of terrorist groups. Among others, it hosts the Palestinian Hamas. You all remember the time when there were the latest incidents, bombings, incursions, and everything in Gaza. You remember Mr. Marshall. Marshall is no longer the boss of Hamas, by the way. But Marshall, I remember him. He was in a big hotel in Doha, in Qatar, where he was living, wasn't he, all year round? And then he was riding a stationary bike and he had a towel on his back. A big Samsung television in the room that allowed him to watch. Isn't it the bombings and the hostilities and all that? And then, of course, he stands in front of a panel of journalists and says, we refuse to cease fire. So, of course, we refuse to cease fire. When you're in your bathtub with lots of bubbles and everything, it's clear that you can afford the luxury of refusing to cease fire. We're not under the bombs, nor is he. He's in Qatar, encouraging others. He's doing everything, diplomatically speaking, so that even more bombs fall on his people in Gaza. The idea is that bombs mean images, victims, donations, money coming into accounts, which then disappears. As usual, he turns that party, he turns the suffering of his people, he turns it into cold, hard cash, which afterwards, the money, for example, from Mr. What's his name? His name is Arafat, who wasn't from Hamas, but Mr. Arafat. The money he stashed in Swiss accounts, numbered Swiss accounts. They haven't finished turning it into a tower yet, just so you know. But that doesn't change anything. They're in the same line as any Arab caliph, as any Arab president, as any Arab regime. Arab regimes survive on their people's blood. Always they turn the blood of their people into food for themselves, for their families, and so on. Well, anyway, after this aside, this African parenthesis, once again, what happened is that Qatar had felt the heat, was seeking to eliminate Hamas, specifically the Palestinian Hamas. And they wanted to send them, to Malaysia. That's it. They wanted to send them to Malaysia. Leave now. It's too dangerous to stay. Before breaking diplomatic relations, Malaysia had already completely cut ties with Qatar. Because I don't know how it went inside. Maybe Malaysia was ready to accept Hamas, to host Hamas, in return for, I don't know, maybe contracts or money or something else. But then they realized that whatever the price paid, it would be a scam. Hosting Hamas would be too dangerous. And so they cut ties with them, which means it's true in a way. It was a gift given to Trump to put the country supporting Hamas in a difficult position. There's also something else for them. It's not just about Hamas. You shouldn't always see everything in relation to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. You shouldn't. It's a conflict that carries a lot of weight in geostrategic issues, that's clear, but you shouldn't see it as the be-all and end-all. Qatar has grown closer to Iran, while Trump and Saudi Arabia both dislike Iran. The timing is perfect, and many groups, including the Muslim Brotherhood, who are well established in Egypt too, but also in Qatar. So Egypt is really the stronghold of the Muslim Brotherhood. But he found that the most extremist members among them found refuge in Qatar. There are television channels that, in the opinion of the average person, or the opinion of politicians, or the opinion of intellectuals, these Qatar-based channels cause unrest in Arab countries. At the slightest protest, at the slightest peace, at the slightest trouble, they start to excite the crowds. They start to stir up the crowds. They start to manipulate information to create even more fitna, as we say in Arabic. And so, indeed, it's true that Qatar was exhausting the patience. That's it. They decided to settle the score with him, but that's how it is. Well, it's true that the other countries aren't clean either when it comes to Islamism. They're not clean when it comes to supporting international terrorism. But well, they took one down. It's better than nothing. It's a small victory. But for me, the way I see it from the outside, it's not much. It's like when thugs hand over one of their own, usually the weakest link, and turn them into the police. He's a thug is exaggerated, but it's better than nothing. Maybe there's a consensus among them. Maybe the Yalta of the thugs is collapsing, along with their unity and consensus. The wall they've been building for years is slowly crumbling. It's good that there are internal tensions. It's good that maybe they're starting to disagree on these things. Well, my friends, I think I've talked enough for today. I know you have elections coming up, the legislative elections. I haven't really followed them. To be honest, when I This morning I turned on my phone and saw news about legislative elections in France. It didn't really affect me. I didn't care one way or the other. I'm concerned that Mr. Macron, who was very hyperactive during the presidential campaign, is now has put it a little bit on the back burner. I think it's very strategic on his part. I think he's waiting for the legislative elections, and after that he'll get to the heart of the matter. He doesn't want to alienate voters before the legislative elections and then end up in a spin, right? All right, I'll leave you, my friends. I can tell you if you want, if you're interested. In England, the elections ended badly. But that was clear, I told you a month and a half ago. When she called the elections, I was sure it would end badly for her, since early elections are rarely a good idea. So that's why she comes out weakened, the Prime Minister here. And it actually threatens Brexit, that's it. The thing is, she won't be able to do this Brexit in the political situation she's in, and maybe we'll end up with a second referendum for Brexit, or maybe she'll still want to go through with Brexit anyway. But in the weak position she's in, it won't go anywhere. That's actually why she called for early elections. Why? Because every time she wanted to negotiate something with the European Union, here it's parliamentary, here they would tell her, we're going to break everything for you. Whatever the negotiation, whatever result you come back with from the European Union, we're going to break it for you. We'll do all we can to delay and stop it. She was weakened in Brexit negotiations, so she called elections to strengthen her majority and negotiate more freely. She said there would be a hard Brexit, but in fact, there was nothing at all. Because what happened is that she came out weakened. And then Brexit today, it only exists on paper, but in reality, it's going nowhere. Because, well, that's it. Anyway, we'll see. Thank you, my friends. And then we'll see each other another time. Thank you, friends. We'll see each other again.